Hello guys, so yesterday we started Laravel mentorship course on creating Travel API, and today you will see a video about lesson 2 about creating the database models and migrations with some fields on top. This is the screen how you would see that if you are a Laravel Daily Premium member with text-based version and with access to GitHub and additional links. But on YouTube I published just the video version and I changed my mind on something. I thought to edit down the kind of summary version, so from 21 minutes lower it down to some 5 or 10 minutes, but in the end I thought it would be unfair because it would be missing quite a lot of details, and also it's an extra work for me to kind of lower the quality. Doesn't make much sense. So on YouTube I will still publish full versions of video course as it is on Laravel Daily Premium. So premium members would get extra access to GitHub, access to Discord, full text-based version where you can copy the snippets. Still quite a lot of benefits to be a premium member. Anyway, I hope you will continue creating that course with me. I hope some of you tried to create a database structure already from yesterday's video, and now you will see my version of it. Tomorrow, the next lesson, the task for you before tomorrow is to create the first public endpoint of listing the travels with pagination and with filtering only public travels. The full description of the job description is in Google Docs, and I will link that in the description below. And tomorrow we will talk about the endpoint. But for now, creating the database. So we start creating our database, and client described it with fields, so we need to just implement it, but there will be a few caveats along the way. So we start with creating Laravel project, Laravel new, travel-API, that's how we will call that. Then we cd into that folder and we will generate roles table, travels table, and tours table with the model as well. In users, we don't need to change anything. We will just need to add relationship to roles, many to many, as it says. So cd travel API, clear, and then do PHP artisan make model role with migration. That's the first database table for us. Then I opened my PHP storm, I added a string field name in the migration and in the role model fillable name. This is needed so we would be able to do something like role create with fields, here with array of fields. If you don't do fillable, then this would throw an error. The alternative approach to fillable is guarded, so instead of doing fillable and then listing all the fields, you could do guarded and then provide, for example, empty array. So these are the fields that are not fillable, which means every field is fillable. I personally prefer to provide fillables instead of guarded, because for future developers then it's perfectly clear which fields are actually fillable in the database without looking at that database or migrations. Next, according to the client specification, we need to create this roles many-to-many relationship from users. And to do that, in PHP Storm, I open the terminal and we need to create a pivot table. And the name of that pivot table is important. So create role user table. It needs to be exactly that, not role users and not users roles. The rule is that those two tables should be in alphabetical order, lowercase, in singular form. If you specify the table name in that order, then you don't need to specify that name separately when creating the relationships. So if we open that role user table, for now, we just fill in foreign ID to role ID constraint and foreign ID to user ID constraint. And by the way, I do remember that the client asked for UUIDs to be used in the specification, but I want to discuss those UUIDs separately. So for now, we'll create all the database with regular IDs and primary keys on auto increment, and then we'll transform that to the UUIDs at the end of this lesson. So we have the pivot table, and this constraint, by the way, thing, for those of you who don't know, is just a shortcut for, you can do it manually, references, column ID on table on rows. So constraint is just a shorter way to write the same thing. And also in constraint, you can provide parameters, which we will do later in this lesson. So you can provide table name. So that may be useful if your table name is not standard. Okay, we have a pivot table, and then to make that pivot table work in the user model, we will add a relationship. I have a feeling that we will query the roles for the user, so we'll check the permissions, but we don't need the relationship the other way around. That's my personal preference. For example, when belongs to many, many to many, you can create both, but I'm a bigger fan of creating relationships when we actually need them. So for now, I will create just roles, return belongs to many role class, and a thing that I started practicing more and more lately is to provide return types. So in this case we have belongs to many, which was automatically by PHP Storm added here on top. That return type is optional, so you don't have to do that, but that provides extra clarity for other developers in the future, and that's kind of a good habit to adopt, especially since Laravel 10 Skeleton also contains return types everywhere. Now, if I go back to the specification of the client, the next model is travels, and here we'll have a few interesting things like slug and virtual column number of nights. But for now, let's just generate that model, PHP Artisan make model travel with -some migration. You can actually create more than just migration, so there are more flags like generate factories, seeders, and others. But again, I'm a fan of creating things only when you actually need it, so I will create factories and seeders when we write automated tests later in this course. For now, model and migration. And here, not sure if you noticed already an interesting thing. Create travel table. Generally, Laravel pluralizes all the forms, so if we provide travel, it should generate travels table, right? But in this case, travel is irregular noun, irregular word, which doesn't have plural of travels, although the client specified it as travels here in plural form. And you can quickly debug the plural forms of things, so you can do PHP Artisan Tinker, for example, and then inside of Tinker you can do str any word and then do plural string function of Laravel, and it will return you travel. For example, if you provide, I don't know, toy, for example, the plural is toys. So this is a proof to you that travel is irregular word. Now, what do we do with that? We have a few options. First, leave it as it is, but then we don't implement the specification exactly as it is. And also for international audience of developers, for example, if the project is then supported by international team, non-English speakers wouldn't know that travel is irregular word. I have a feeling that it's better to move away from correct grammar in favor of clarity in the code. So what I would do, let's close the terminal, I would rename travels here and also rename the file itself. Refactor rename in PHP Storm, travels table. But that is not enough. We can create the fields, but then we need to specify that if our model works with table name that is different from default pluralization, we need to open travel model and specify table equals not travel but travels. Like this. Interesting case. For quite a long time I haven't encountered irregular nouns in Laravel, so it's great that it's appearing in this course kind of by the way. And then we fill in the columns of migrations and fillables. I've done it from my notes, pasted it here to save you some time for me just typing. What I can comment here, default of boolean could be true or false. String slug should be unique, and we will get to that a bit later in the lesson. And slug will be automatically generated. And also number of days will be a real field in the database, and number of nights, according to the original specification, will be a virtual column, an accessor in the model. Speaking of the model, we add the same things as fillable in the model. Okay, so we're good with fields. Now let's get to those extra behavior for slug and number of nights. So, slug for travels. I've opened the console here terminal on the left hand side, so you would see it better. And what is slug? If we open PHP Artisan Tinker, we can do str. For example, my travel will be the name of travel, and then slug that. It will be SEO friendly name, so lowercase, without spaces, with dashes, and we can generate that easily, as you can see, with Laravel. And if we don't need it to be unique, then that's all we need to do. So I will show you this way if you don't need that uniqueness, and then I will show you perhaps more flexible way, but with external package. So let's close the Tinker and let's generate observer. Observer class PHP Artisan make observer for the model of travel. So travel observer, and then we specify model of travel like this. Let's close the terminal for now. And in travel observer, interesting thing that by default observer generates some methods like created, updated, deleted, which means what would happen after the record is created, updated, deleted. But in our case, we need to modify the record before it is saved in the database, not after. So we need a method called creating, not created. It is not generated by default, but we need to create that manually. And we delete all the other methods because we don't actually need them. So when creating, we will modify the travel record like this. So travel slug would be str travel name to slug, like this. So this will be our observer method, and we need to register that observer in event service provider. There are two ways to register that in event service provider. For example, in boot method, we can specify travel model, observe, and then provide travel observer class, and both of them are generated with my PHP Storm here added on top. Or if you don't want to pollute boot method, and if you are a fan of configuration, you can provide that as array observers, protected observers equals array, and then model and array of observer files. So travel model class, and it will be array which observers are here. So travel observer class like this. So two syntax ways. And now if we try to migrate the database so far and create that record, PHP Artisan migrate. So if we migrate, we have those tables. And if we now launch PHP Artisan Tinker and try to create travel, create with field of name, for example, something, and also add a few other fields like description and number of days, class travel not found. Of course, it should be with all the model namespace in this case. And as you can see, slug is something automatically generated, which means it works with observer, but it's not unique. So if we try to create another travel with the same name, we would have error from the database because in migrations we specified that this should be unique, but on Eloquent level we have an error now. So instead of doing that with observer, we could of course add that logic into the observer and check for the database, but there are a few Laravel packages that would do it easier. So let's just undo everything in Event Service Provider, and let's remove that travel observer as well. Just delete the observer folder, and instead let's use this package, Eloquent Sluggable by Colin Vbrock. Very old but very good package. Alternative, if you want alternatives, it's Spicy package Laravel Sluggable. They work in a similar fashion, but this is older one and my personal preference because I just am used to it. So to install that, it's very easy actually. Installation is just composer require. So in terminal we do composer require, and then in the model of travel we need to specify two things. We need to add sluggable here, and then also sluggable method where to take the source of that slug, what to generate it from the source. In our case, source will be the name. So we just copy and paste the method of sluggable and change that to name. And now if we repeat the same thing in Tinker, let's clear it up and launch Tinker again and repeat create. See the result, it will automatically make a different slug if the name is unique. So there will be something 2, another one will be something 3, and so on. So if you need the unique behavior for your slug, I do recommend this package. Next we have this number of nights virtual column. I would kind of interpret that as not a real column in the database, but calculated computed column, which in Eloquent terms is Accessor. So we can just create Accessor of number of days in the travel model here, and I will use Laravel 9 newer syntax for accessors, public function number of nights, which returns attribute, and attribute comes from Eloquent casts. We return attribute make, and attribute make has get and set, both or either of those functions. So we generate only get in this case, and we need to have function from value of number of nights, but in this case the attribute is calculated from another value in the database, another column of the same table, which is number of days. So we need to pass attributes by default, and then we return attributes number of days minus 1, like this. So this is the syntax. So now if we generate a new travel record again, let's open Tinker, let's do travel create, and then do travel, for example, travel latest first, and then echo travel number of nights. The result will be 4. You can also use alternative syntax, older syntax of Laravel accessors and mutators, which is get something attribute and set something attribute. That syntax will still work in Laravel 10 and beyond. From what I know, it isn't planned to be deprecated or removed. So if you prefer, you can do public function get number of nights attribute like this, and return this number of days minus 1. Like this. It is shorter, but it uses string magic of function name, so not everyone likes that, but basically use whatever you prefer. I will stick to the newer syntax of Laravel 10. The final model and the final database table is tours, and here we will encounter two things that we need to take care of separately. Travel ID will be again irregular noun, and then price should be calculated with accessor and mutator, and I will show you that in a minute. For now, just artisan make model tour with migration, nothing really fancy. And again, to save you some time from me typing, I filled in from my notes. So these are the fillable fields for tour, including travel ID as relationship. And in the tour migration, this is what I meant by irregular noun. If we leave it like this, then the migration would not work. Let me prove it to you by actually running the migration, php artisan migrate. The error will be that it tries to search for the table of travel which doesn't exist. So we can fix that by specifying which table to look for. And also let's fill in the relationship. In travel, let's create has many for the tours. And actually, I'm a bigger fan of creating the relationships first before attributes, because relationships are probably the most important things in the models, the most widely searched for. So I created a bit higher. So tours, again, has many returned, and return tour class. Again, I think I have a feeling that we will query the tours by certain travel, but we will not, at least for now, need the other way around relationship. So I just create has many, and I don't create belongs to yet. And with this model, as I mentioned, we have price as a separate logic. So the client says this: prices are integer multiplied by 100. It's kind of a well-known rule in the database space that you should not store money-related fields as floats, as decimals. You should store them in cents in integer and then transform it back and forth when saving or getting the data. So this is exactly what we need to do here. So in the tour model, we will create, again, attribute, public function price, attribute. I will again use a newer syntax of Laravel 9, return attribute make, and in this case we will have both get and set. Get function value will be, when getting, we need to divide by 100, sorry, value 100, and when setting the data, function from value would be multiplied by 100, which means that in the database we'll have integers all the time, but when showing to the client on the front end, it will return with cents. And final thing that we need to do in this lesson is to take care of UUID as primary keys. I deliberately left that as the last part of this lesson because maybe not every one of you would need those, and maybe you would be okay with database structure like this as we currently have. But if we do need UUID, these are the changes that we need to make. First, in all the migrations, so create users and others, we need to change table ID to table UUID, but not just UUID. We need to specify that the field name should stay the same ID, because otherwise by default it is UUID. And also we need to specify that it is a primary key like this. So we need to change that line in all the tables that have auto increments. So in our case it's users, then roles, then travels, and tours in 4 tables. Then, since we have primary keys with UUIDs, we need to change foreign keys to the UUIDs. So everywhere we have foreign ID, we need to change that to foreign UUID. Laravel has that in migrations, so we just change those 2 letters basically. Foreign UUID from tours to travels. In role user, same thing. So foreign UUID and foreign UUID here. So that's it. And then the final change in migration is related to personal access tokens. Instead of morphs to tokenable, which is actually a user ID, we need to have UUID morphs like this for polymorphic relationships like this. So these are the changes in migrations. And then, so it would generate the UUIDs. We need to specify in all the models of Eloquent a trait has UUID. So in the user model, this function is relatively new in Laravel since 9.30. You just specify has UUIDs, and then Laravel takes care of everything, how those UUIDs are automatically generated. And of course, that has UUIDs should be in the use section. So we do that in the user model. In the role model, has UUIDs like this. In tour model, on top of has factory, we have has UUIDs, and also travel model has UUIDs. Now let's remigrate the whole database fresh. It is successful, and let's try to create that travel record and let's see if UUID is successful. So artisan tinker again and travel create, and we have ID as this thing, not auto-incremented number, but UUID value. So we finished created our database schema, which is kind of the most important part in the project beginning, as I would say. And let's create the visual schema out of that. You can use any tool you want. My favorite is dbeaver, which generates the visual schema by just double-clicking the database, so you see this. And you can see that our database is actually divided into 3 sections. So you could say Laravel system tables, these 4 ones, then tours and travels, and then roles and users. So that's it for this lesson. I know a lot of content in one lesson. If you have any questions, let's discuss in the comments or on Discord.